Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian. I am here today with a US M2 Flamethrower. This is the standard US flamethrower for World War II. This particular one, in fact, was also refurbished and reused in the Korean War and also the Vietnam War. So really, this is the classic, stereotypical US World War II and Korean War flamethrower. Now, this isn't the gun that the US went into World War II with, as, in fact, the US went into World War II with no flamethrowers at all. Quickly realized that that was a problem, and threw together an emergency program, developed the M1 flamethrower in a mere 90 days. It was all off-the-shelf technology, components. It was a terrible gun, poor reliability, poor combat effectiveness, just miserable. In fact, it was so bad that it really spurred a lot of research and development interest to develop its replacement, the M2. In fact, the M1 was barely starting to get issued before they were already in the process of developing this flamethrower to replace it. So, these guys went into production early in 1944, and this was the culmination of, like I said, a lot of research and development work. The U.S. Ordnance Department, the Chemical Warfare Department, studied the combat use of the M1 flamethrowers in a whole bunch of different units, and they went to fairly significant lengths to obtain examples of every other nationality of flamethrower that they could find to study their effectiveness as well. So they were testing out, in particular, German, Italian, Japanese, and British flamethrower units to find out what worked, what didn't, what was a good system, what was a bad system. And the culmination of this was the M2 here, which is pretty much, without argument, the best flamethrower of World War II. So the US went from the worst one of any country in the war to the best one. And it really says something, actually, that this particular unit, which was made sometime early to mid-1944, is still functional. It went through 3 wars, got refurbished a couple times by the military, and yesterday I was out shooting it myself. So it says that that's pretty good quality for a flamethrower unit. Most of the time, old flamethrowers are, you're really taking your chances on whether they're still functional or not. So this one is, and it's a testament to the design. So what I want to do today is go through a bunch of the actual mechanical features of this particular flamethrower, because most people don't have a clue how these things work. It's this magic thing that you're risking life and limb and most of your skin to put on, and flame goes out the end, and that's about it, all anyone knows. So the way these actually work is you have these 2 tanks, which are connected at the bottom. These hold fuel. This guy holds approximately 4 3/4 gallons of fuel total. The actual fuel used in the war varied, but basically it was a gelled fuel. It was discovered that a gelled fuel would give you a much greater range, like triple the range of just a liquid. That's because the gelled fuel stayed together and it retained its inertia, really. Think of it as the difference between firing buckshot and firing birdshot out of a shotgun. That birdshot, you've got very small pieces of shot. They're all hitting wind resistance and they slow down and fall to the ground very quickly. That's a liquid fuel. A gelled fuel is like buckshot. You've got larger chunks sticking together. They fly farther. In addition, that gelled fuel burns slower because you have a lump of fuel and it's burning from the outside in. It's not all burning at once. It's less aerated. And so that means, for example, even if you had the gelled fuel range, if you're shooting liquid fuel, even if it could get all the way out there, it will have all burned up by the time it does. The gelled fuel both gave it the extra range and allowed it to still be effective at that long range. So early in the war, the troops were actually using a mixture of shipping fuel, bunker C, mixed with gasoline to get it to about the right consistency. And then they standardized on an aluminum stearate mixture, which gelled gasoline up, or gelled diesel or kerosene. And there was a lot of chemical development that I won't get into here because that's a little beyond my depth. But ultimately, they were using napalm, the stereotypical napalm. It's jellied gasoline, it sticks to things, it burns for a long time, and it flies a long distance. So you fill these 2 tanks with that fuel. Now, that filling is actually quite easy because these have threaded plugs in the top. Now, in World War II, these would have been capped with 1 fixed just plug and 1 that has this little pipe on it. And this pipe is a safety feature. This is a rupture disc, so that if the pressure exceeds 450 psi, this rupture disc will blow and the pressure will vent out this. So this would have been threaded in here. put it in and make sure that it's pointing away from the back of your head when you do so. That's one of your safety features. The reason that you need that safety feature, oh, and by the way, the difference here is in the Korean War, when they upgraded this to the M2A1, they replaced this vent cap, or they replaced this rupture disc with a typical vent cap, where you can unthread the center to vent pressure out of it, slowly in a controlled manner. They moved the rupture disc down onto the regulator, a position where it was not prone to damage. This thing, you know, this would be easy to damage if you dropped the gun, or a lot of things could happen in the combat field. So, World War II caps, Korean War caps. Anyway, the reason that you need this overpressure protection is that you're firing this fuel, the military did, at 380 psi. That's in this tank, 380, in the gun, 380. But your actual pressure tank here, this is filled with compressed gas. Nitrogen is best because it's inert. The military, because of necessity and supply issues, would occasionally use compressed air. That's more dangerous because it has oxygen in it, which can lead to explosions. Nitrogen can't explode. It's got no oxygen, no flammable components. Anyway, this bottle is pressurized much higher than your actual fuel pressure. So today this would be pressurized up to 1300 psi. And then there's a regulator that connects this pressure bottle to these two fuel bottles. That regulator is a constant pressure regulator. So it's set to 380, and it ensures that these are always at 380. At first, your fuel level is going to be up here, and you've just got a little bit of pressurized gas at the top. As you fire, the fuel level goes down because it's blowing out the front of the gun. And by the end, you've got fuel down at like here, and all of this is filled with pressurized gas. That regulator in the bottom ensures that no matter what the fuel level is, you're always getting the same pressure, which means the range was always the same. Your first shot and your last shot. You had a total of about 6 seconds of fuel at the rate that this fires. So typically an operator would use like 1 second bursts, and you'd get about half a dozen of them, and they'd all be the same range and they'd all work the same way. That's not how a lot of other nations' flamethrowers worked, and we'll touch on that in some other videos. However, in case something went wrong with that regulator, you could have an issue where your 1300 psi blows into these two, and all of a sudden they're operating way over pressure. Rather than having this burst and blow flammable liquid and chunks of pressure tank all over the operator, instead you've got this rupture disc that bursts, basically like the overpressure vent in a water heater. It blows out, controls the release of pressure, and does so before you get anywhere near the point where this tank is going to rupture. So, very important safety device. Now, moving on, once you've got the gas, so you've got your gas, you've got your fuel, in order to use the gun you have to connect those two together so that the gas pushes the fuel out. That is done here. This, right here, is your valve. Connects to a dial handle right here, and this is reachable by the operator. He can reach back when he's wearing the gun to right here, turn this on, this connects his pressure to his fuel, and then things are ready to go. This is the connection where your flame hose, the hose for the gun, is going to connect to the fixed tube on the backpack mount. So this is a locking latch. We lift that up, and then you've got two arms that open here. There's still a little bit of diesel fuel in there, so I don't want to pull the plug out. This is just a plug. This works just like any standard hydraulic fitting. That slides in. Lock these two levers down. That prevents the levers from coming open. You're sealed, and you're ready to go. Now, what's kind of cool, this hose has like 4 layers in it. The very inside, it's 3/4 inch hydraulic hose. Then on top of that is like a rubberized sealing layer, so that if you get a pinhole in the hydraulic hose, it will seal. You'll get like this fuel blister that comes through that you can see it. It's not a good thing, but it prevents the hose from bursting and lets you know that you need to address this. On top of that rubberized sealant layer is actually a braided steel cable, which is designed from the factory, from the original design, to be shrapnel proof. Pretty good idea. When this thing is in operation, this hose is pressurized to 380 psi of napalm. And so if if someone happens to throw a grenade next to you, or a shell hit, or any number of things, you don't want this to be real fragile and vulnerable to getting broken, and then all of your napalm spews out all over who knows where. Not a good thing. And then the last layer is a waxed canvas as a waterproofing agent. Right, the gun itself has a number of interesting features to it. First off, you'll see there's a big squeeze trigger here, and there's a gun-looking trigger up here. The trigger in the front fires the ignition charge. The squeeze trigger in the back opens the valve to allow fuel to flow. What's cool about these, and this is one of those elements that makes this a very advanced, very effective flamethrower design, is that while your trigger is back here, the valve is actually sealing right up here. So this whole tube of the gun is pressurized and full of fuel, but the seal is up here. What that means is when I open it and fire, gas streams out, lights, flames, etc. When I release the trigger, it seals it right here, which means we don't have any unpressurized fuel left to dribble out the end. If our seal was back here, which by the way is how a lot of the other flamethrowers of World War I and World War II worked, once we shut it off, now we've got this whole tube full of fuel, and we've still got some fire up front, and if I take this and fire it, release the trigger, and then point it down, I'm going to get dribbling napalm on my feet. Not a good thing. The US design, the M2, prevents that by having, basically there's a long rod. This works just like a frost-proof valve, if you've ever worked with one of those. And we'll show you that up close in just a moment. So there's a grip safety on the back, and then a squeeze trigger. When using these, it was really important that you just death grip this thing and open it all the way. Because if you just squeeze it a little bit, you're going to open the valve a little bit, and if you've ever taken a garden hose and opened it just a little bit, it kind of drizzles and doesn't work very well, and you don't want it doing that with flaming napalm. You want a steady, high-pressure stream going away from you quickly. So that's one of the operating keys, is to do that. Now, one of the problems with a lot of early flamethrowers was that they didn't work well in water. They were easily, if they got wet, if there was a lot of humidity, how do you ignite the fuel? The early ones often would use a bottle of hydrogen gas venting past two little spark electrodes, like a little stun gun sort of thing. And that electrical arc would light the hydrogen gas, and that would give you a nice hot flame, in theory, to light your fuel. The problem was those things were notoriously unreliable. If they got wet, they wouldn't work. They were dependent on batteries that would die or corrode, or not good stuff. What was used by the M2 and a lot of the other more effective flamethrowers was a set of Pyrotechnic cartridges. So this basically is a 5-round cartridge of little teeny road flares. They're fired by basically a friction match, and what happens is when I pull this trigger, it's effectively just striking a match inside one of these 5 cartridges. Now this happens to be a cartridge with 3 fired units and then 2 duds. So these look like they would when the unit was ready to use, but they've been fired and they don't work. The original strikers didn't run. You know, these are 50 or 60 or 70 years old. So a cartridge, one of these cartridges goes in the nose of the gun, and I'll show you that whole assembly in just a moment. And then you have a totally waterproof ignition mechanism. These were, first off, they were transported in sealed tins, which obviously makes them weatherproof to begin with. And then once you have this out, it's wax sealed on the back, it's wax sealed on the front. There's actually a lead seal on the front of each one of these charges. And while they will deteriorate over extended time, many months, you can drop this thing in the water, pull it out, put it in the gun, and it'll run just fine. That was one of the really important points of the M2, is that you could literally jump off a Higgins boat, submerge completely in the water, climb up on the beach, shake the water out of the end of the gun, just for convenience sake, really, and the gun would immediately light and fire. And that was somewhat uncommon of flamethrowers. Most of the time they had to be taken a lot more careful care of in order to work. So, let me show you the full, let's take this apart and show you that. We did this out on the range, so that's a little range bit we'll splice in here. All right, so I've got the muzzle of this thing completely disassembled. We're gonna go ahead and get it ready to use. The first thing I'm gonna put on is our spring assembly here. This is what actually rotates this guy one position each time I pull the trigger. So that goes on, and then we're gonna put the colored pads facing forward, drop that into place. Now, the spring has this stud coming out of it that catches in this cutout on the muzzle. So I put this on, capture that stud, and then as I screw this into place, I am winding the spring. There There we go. And we are in position. There is a locking stud right here that lines up with that notch, and we're good to go. Now, I want to go ahead and touch one of these off static, just here, just so we can see what that igniter cartridge really does, because you never see that sort of thing. Ooh. So that's what's igniting the diesel fuel coming out of this sucker. And that's going to run for, these run for about 8 seconds. The original military manual says they ran for 11. And now I've lit the ground on fire, so excuse me, one moment. Seal. Now you would get these cartridges in cans like this. So you've got 2 cartridges per can. Here's one that's been opened. Opens just like an old World War II can of ammo. Got a sardine can key here on the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and pop that tab up, and then we just wind it like this, pop the seal. So these are 1967 dated, so this is Vietnam era use. Got some seals in there. All right, and there is one brand new out of the packaging M2 Flamethrower igniter cartridge. All right, so that gives you a pretty good idea, I hope, of how the ignition for this thing actually works. Fire that thing off, you've got this nice hot road flare, it's burning about 10 seconds, and that allows you to shoot during those 10 seconds. So whether it's, in theory, one complete 6-second dump, use all your fuel, that works great, or if you're going to do a series of short bursts, 1-second firings, if there's a whole series of pillboxes that your unit is attacking, you hit one, and of course it'll be way more than 10 seconds before you get to the second one. Well, you've got 5 of these cartridges to work with. So it's quick and easy to reload should you need to recharge with a new set, and it worked very well. If you need to get rid of this thing very quickly, it was set up with a pair of quick connect straps. So the hook on the bottom here snaps onto the bottom of the mount right there. And then you just wear these 2 shoulder straps. If you have to ditch the gun, you grab this, pop it open, and this separates into 2 pieces. Gun drops right off your back, and you can book it somewhere else. Whether anything as serious as the gun has been shot by a Japanese sniper and is venting fuel to, well, any number of things, really. But both of these buckles, it's interesting, one of these is a Vietnam era buckle, and one of them is a World War II era buckle, just came together as part of the various rebuilds that this gun has been through in the military system. But they both work exactly the same. Pop that, dump the gun, run for your life. All right, I think that's going to pretty well cover the mechanical aspects of the M2 here, and that means it's time to go shoot it. I went through the operator safety training program to run one of these, thanks to Charlie Hobson, who supplied it. And let's take a look at that, because, man, this thing is impressive and fun to shoot.
Great. All right, give me the test burst.
Test firing.
That's good. Fire it well.
So the biggest thing you notice shooting one of these is the flame coming, the heat coming back at you. It's hot. That's a really, really impressive experience. I think my knees are actually wobbling a little bit. This is really cool. So I think we are going to go ahead and fill this back up and do some more shooting with it, and we're going to get you guys some high speed of it. We got the World War II M2 Flamethrower here. Let's play with it. I'm out of igniters.
What does it smell like?
Woo! Thanks for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video. This was really a fantastic, impressive experience to run this firearm, this flamethrower. I think there are a lot of people who go, why on earth would anyone need a flamethrower? Well, boy, they're an interesting historical item, and they're a really impressive experience to actually run one. So if it's something that you're interested in, if you have an old one that you inherited, found, bought at a flea market, Charlie Hobson is the guy to go to for testing, restoration, rebuild, all that sort of stuff. If you're looking to get into this and find out what it takes to own one yourself, check out his website at www.flamethrowerexpert.com. And of course, thank you all for supporting me through Patreon. If you enjoy the video, please consider stopping over at my Patreon account. Check it out. If you think it's worth supporting, go ahead and drop me $1 a month. It really helps me afford, for example, the fuel and nitrogen and time to take something like this out to the range to show you guys. Thanks for watching.